I was out of the country when this happened. Anyway, I don't know how much news coverage there was about obviously a small airplane that went down in Georgia that ended up being based here. Obviously, those you don't know, this is Jason Bailey. He's the one who owned the Bellanca Viking that crashed, so he was kind enough to share his story today with us, and so I'm going to turn the podium over to him and let him tell us as much or as little as he feels comfortable doing. Obviously, it's an active investigation right now, and so anyway, so be cognizant of what that as far as he tells his side of the story. Okay, Jason, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Well, good morning and buenos dias, whatever you want to say there. I wanted to start out by saying I had always envisioned or dreamed that when I talked to a group of people in aviation this large, it would be after winning basic aerobatic at Rome, Georgia, but that's not the case today. Which kind of brings me to a couple points that I have. If you're a pilot, a student pilot, or you intend to be, would you mind raising your hand? So pretty much everybody. Excellent. If you've ever had a physics class, would you raise your hand? I didn't understand what Dr. Broussard was trying to tell me when he was teaching about Newton's first law of motion. But it states that an object at rest stays at rest, an object in motion stays in motion at the same speed in the same direction, unless enacted upon by an outside force. And boy, did I learn what that meant as my Bellanca Super Viking became not so super 2 weeks ago exactly today. What I'd like to really start out with before I tell my story is that I'm walking, I'm talking. That in and of itself is a miracle. And I do give God the glory for that. I do say, proclaim He's good. And I tell people, even if I hadn't walked away, even if I'd have ended up in a body bag and my passenger and 2 dogs, He'd still be good. And so, there's my disclaimer on that. As far as getting into kind of what happened and how things sort of, I want to talk about the chain of events, because as we all know, anybody in here ever read an NTSB report? Okay, watched a real pilot story on AOPA. I watched them all quite a few times. I took my first lesson back March 3rd in 2012. And 6 months later, I was the proud owner of my most prized possession, the little green card from the beloved FAA, as a private pilot. And since then, I've accrued approximately 487 hours of flight time. Since 2012, I've given 82 free rides in airplanes. I still own the Cessna 150 across the tarmac here on the runway. It does not have an engine on it because I don't want a repeat of what happened. But we're not going to talk about that today. And so the point of that is I've had the privilege of flying with some of, in my opinion, the best, most competent, caring, and safety-minded instructors in the nation. One of them being this gentleman right here, Mark Winton. This guy is a treasure trove of knowledge, and I would say his #1 foundational principle is safety. And as you advance in your career as a pilot, I don't care if you've got 1 hour or 10,000, what happened to me could happen to you. Amen?
Amen.
And so kind of on that point, and I've had the privilege of flying with Enrique Troconis, the guy with the heavy accent from Venezuela. And I can't tell you how many, I call him Rafiki, because he's always beating me over the head with some new lesson. And he's told me stories of things that he's gotten into in aviation and what he did to avert near disaster or disaster. And at the end of it, he'd always say, "And I survived." And thankfully, I can stand here and say and I survived. So thank you very much for everything you instilled. He actually owned, his first aircraft was a Bellanca Super Viking as well. If you're not familiar with that aircraft, it has a wood wing. The spars are as thick as these I-beams in the hangar of Sitka spruce. And you know, the thing that was told to me before I bought it, a lot of people said watch out for termites, a lot of people said watch out for mold and mildew. But after reading about it, what I really found is that if maintained properly, that aircraft is, in my opinion now, especially going through what I've gone through, my #1 choice of aircraft for me and my family when it comes to surviving a crash in a fuselage. It has 1430 tubular steel. It has a roll cage, if you will, and as you'll get into the accident, I'll tell you kind of what happened to the wings. But one other thing I don't want to forget is a little bit about my flight training. I don't mind admitting it. I had a wet spot in my pants after my first stall lesson, okay? I was terrified. You know, there's no other way to put it. Enrique says I'm a chicken. And what I really want you to take from today is that, folks, ladies and gentlemen, there is a time to be a Maximus, and there's a time to be a chicken. And the time to be a chicken is before the propeller ever turns over, a single turn. And the time to be a Maximus or a Braveheart is when things hit the fan. And you can't do that if you haven't had the training. And so part of that is, after I got my private license, I called it my license to learn, and it has been. I can just tell you this, I've been endorsed for spins. I do have a tail wheel endorsement, obviously complex and high performance. Did my initial aerobatic training with Mark Whitten, who's a phenomenal aerobatics instructor, to teach that. And so some of those things I'll tell you, I feel like helped save me, Tammy Gerard, Buddy Bailey, and is it Brian Gerard or Brian Bailey? It's your dog. It's our dog. Okay. But so back to today. We'll start at the first link. Ever been wanting to go somewhere in an airplane and you get to the airport 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour late for this, that, or the other? What happens? Gotta go, gotta go. What happens when you gotta go? You gotta go. Right, you rush something. For me, it's always one thing, okay? Or maybe it's just a few small things that are not in and of themselves anything potentially fatal. But you take them all and you put them together, and suddenly you have a perfect concoction and solution for disaster. And sometimes you get away with it, and sometimes you don't. So, get to the airport a little bit late, then I have to do some things to finish the pre-flight. And by the way, I want everyone in here to understand something that I always carry in my heart. Anytime I walk up to an airplane and I'm about to pre-flight and intend to fly, I tell myself, this airplane is going to do its dangest to kill me today. Anything it can do to kill me, it's going to do. And it's my job to prevent that from happening. And if you don't think that way, I would encourage you to. But I got here, the intention was for me, my two dogs, and Tammy, and to fly down to spend the weekend with my family on Saturday. The original goal was to depart no later than 6. Well, if you look at FlightAware, I think I initially picked up flight following at around 7:13 p.m. A little different there, right? A little bit behind the curve. Both main tanks were full. Also filled one of the aux tanks. It has 4 fuel tanks, 2 mains and 2 auxes, which gave about 3.5 hours of flight time, and this 160 nautical mile trip lasts about an hour in the Viking because it cruises at 200. It is a 300 horsepower, powered by a Continental IO 520. Pre-flight checks on the external, great. Plenty of oil on the stick, looks good. Exhaust shrouds moving just the way they should. Tires good, brakes good, cables good. Structural integrity of the airframe good. No water in the fuel tanks. Actually, there was some in the left main, and I drained all that out. Folks, I don't mind sharing this. The first oil change I did in my Cessna when I first got it about a year ago, I looked down, and after the cowl was off, and there's this thing that at the time I didn't know it's called a gascolator, and there was about a cup of water in that because I had never sunk it, because I somehow missed that. How could that have turned out different? I don't know. So please, you know, one of the main things you've got to make sure to look at is fuel. What is the quality of the fuel and what is the quantity on board? So anyways, get in. Fired up, clear prop. Everything's great. Do the, taxi down for runway 05. Going to depart and then turn right on my southeasterly heading. Now the weather check, just so you know, I always check the weather. Please tell me everyone in here checks the weather before you depart. Okay. I utilize ForeFlight, and I like to get a holistic view by looking at the METARs at the airports along the route, looking at the TAFs, and looking at the radar, and paying attention to temperature and dew point. And what I noticed is that day, a very large line of thunderstorms had passed through my intended destination. But at that point in time, the sky was clear. There was, the ceilings were broken at 2,800, 3,300. But visibility was 10 statute miles. Let me ask you something. Hot day. Line of storms comes through, cools off, it starts to get evening. What does that storm leave in the atmosphere behind it? Moisture. Can anybody tell me what dew point is?
What's the point at which the moisture condenses?
Into solid water, right? Guess what the temperature was at 3 Juliet 7, Greene County Airport, where I was going? 20 degrees Celsius. Guess what the dew point was? 20 degrees Celsius. When did I pay attention to this? 60 miles out. Oh, crap. Oh, and now there's scattered clouds at 200. That's probably fog. Anyway, so that's that on weather. The one thing I'll tell you, if I could do it any different, as far as the go, no-go with weather, I would have called it off. And here's why. I did not have the ability as a VFR pilot to stay below the ceiling and have enough altitude in the event of an engine failure to have gliding distance to give me time. And yes, I was legal. Let me say that again. I was completely legal in terms of what I did with my flight path being a VFR pilot. But the story ended the way it did because I ran out of options because I didn't have altitude. First point that I had to potentially avert the situation was when I noticed, and this always happens at night for whatever reason in airplanes. I've got a lot of night hours. I told Mark that. I won't have as many now anymore. Not in a single. But as I approached passing Dalton, I had to actually go around the Smoky Mountains to the west of them, as Mark was talking about, because of the ceilings. I couldn't clear it, so I just went west, which added a little more time, which gave more time for the fog to develop. But 20 miles out from here, I noticed this weird vibration. Something just didn't sound right. Just different. Could have been my mind playing tricks on me, right? Just turn the music up louder. But everything's in the green, oil pressure, oil temp, cylinder head temp, you know, hadn't lost manifold pressure, RPM's great, airplane hadn't lost any airspeed, we're just bumping along. So looking back, it was distinguishable, and if I had to do it all over again, especially at night, I would have landed at Dalton, swallowed my pride, called a friend, said, I need you to pick me up, bring me back to the airport. So that was the first opportunity. But I continued the flight, made it around the Smokies, then found out about the fog, as I was telling you, and I make a decision as we get closer. We were 30 miles out from the intended destination, and I was talking to Atlanta Center, and I realized, based on what I could see on the ground, and I was asking Tammy, I said, do you see a lot of fog down there? You know, there's no moon, but you can tell that it's fog. Passed over Lake Lanier, and she said, yeah. I said, all right, well, we're not even going to try to make it into Greene County. I said, we're going to shoot for Madison, which is just a little bit, it's about another 10 miles closer from where we were. And I told Atlanta Approach my intentions. And at that point, as I got near Madison and all the light pollution was there from the city lights, it was like VFR on top of the city. So, okay, well, we're not going into Madison. And at that point, I radioed Atlanta Approach and I said, yeah, Atlanta Center, Super Viking 6640 Victor here, requesting vectors to Monroe County Airport. I want to say it's Delta Juliet 7, whatever it is. So they told me, you know, turn heading 177 Fort Victor, and I got turned, keyed up the runway lights, got the beacon in sight. I was 13 miles out at about 2,800 feet MSL, and field elevation there is 845. Okay, we're good. We're good. She got on the horn with family. I told her to call Dad, you know, let him know he's got to come to Monroe because we can't get into the fog. Get 6 miles out, Atlanta radios me again, Super Viking 40 Victor, verify you have field in sight, say 12 o'clock, 6 miles. I said, roger that, got it in sight, and they said, let them know when I was turning base or whatever, I can't remember. Everything good. And then I got 3 miles from the field, same altitude, and suddenly a very unexpected, all of a sudden, bang! And just, the only way I can describe it is, it'd been like somebody took a small pot of gas and just ignited it inside the cowling. Fire started spewing out of the very front, right where the propeller was. Immediately the cockpit started filling up with smoke, and I've heard things come out of that young lady's mouth I never thought I would. But I'll tell you this, she did not scream, she did not panic. She said her one expletive, which we're all entitled to that in that kind of moment. And she grabbed the fire extinguisher very valiantly, and I could tell as I was trying to figure out what to do, she didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't want to fool with it, so I just opened the side window and it started pulling the smoke out so we could breathe and talk and see again. And at this point in time, I hadn't made any power changes. So I said, this is interesting. I wonder if I can fix it. So I leaned the fuel mixture to see if I can mitigate the fire, because I know I'm not going to make the field given my current altitude and distance. That doesn't help. I started losing manifold pressure. I saw the oil pressure start falling. The fire was getting more intense. The cylinder head temps were going through the roof, and so was the oil temp. And at that point, I had a critical decision to make. Keep trying to fly this damn thing. And at that point, that's what it was in every sense of the word. It was a damn thing at that point. And that's what I realized. And I said, okay, I've read hundreds of NTSB reports, and mine is not going to read, and the occupants were consumed by a post-crash fire. So I made the choice, even though there was no suitable landing place, to pull the mixture and turn the emergency shutoff valve to off. At that point, I still had a blazing fire. So, contrary to what we're taught and what we normally should do, and that's trim for best glide, I had to dive the airplane down so that I could blow the fire out, which I did. I think the radar return showed it. I hit, I want to say, 158 knots, and immediately trimmed the airplane back to best glide. Fire's out. I still have the beacon in sight, but it's slowly fading away from view. And for me, that was the sickening part of the whole fiasco, was just knowing at that moment in time, I am not going to make the field. And I radioed Atlanta Center. I said, Atlanta Center 48 Victor, I've had an engine failure. I'm not going to make the field. And at that point, I didn't care what they said. I wasn't interested in it. I was going to fly this damn airplane and try to save our lives. And so, to the left, there was just a very large section of trees, of forest. So my mind very quickly, now you got to understand, from the time of the fire to the time that we impacted was about 40 seconds. So I'm going through all this, and then I see the trees, and I say, okay, well, you know, Enrique always said you can climb down the tree, you never climbed up. But I really don't care to have branches stuck through my neck and in my chest and this, that, and the other. To the right was just roads and kind of, you know, classic suburban America, riddled with power lines and fences and God knows what else. And straight ahead, just on the 45-degree angle of runway 21 of Monroe, was a line of trees in a very small field. You would have been impressed, Enrique.
I am impressed.
Because I remember when he did my checkout, he demonstrated some beautiful landings in the Viking. The Viking's a handful because it has a direct drive nose wheel, and you got to come in somewhat hot. And Enrique said, okay, show me you know how to do this. We were at Madison County in Alabama, and I put the thing down and had it stopped at 800 feet, which is below what the book says the minimum demonstrator was. And he said, well, you know how to fly that damn thing. So.
But hold on a second, the most important thing is that before you flew to Moontown that very same day, you told me, Moontown is going for 2,000 feet runway. Are you sure you want to do this?
That's right.
So it went from, my God, can I land in 2,000 feet? So I stopped without brakes and then home. That's a major improvement in a matter of 3 hours.
Yes, it is. And if you hadn't flown with the guy, you need to. He has some of the best short field and brass strip skills I've seen. So, back to the story, you talked about someone putting an airplane in a baseball diamond size. Okay, so I made that decision. That's where we're going. We were obviously coming in hot. Last radar return was at 900 feet, which meant I had 55 feet below me, and I was running 106. Okay? Here's why. You can run out of some of these, but you don't want to run out of all at the same time. And that's altitude, airspeed, and ideas. Okay? I was out altitude, but kind of out of ideas. But I did have airspeed, which kind of helped me take this option. And so I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mush the airplane into the top of those trees. Not in the very tops, but sort of wherever I can put it. And by the way, I saw the whole thing unfolding with the landing light. And people said, man, that's scary. And I say, no. I had a job to do. I didn't have time to panic or worry about it. I was busy flying the airplane. But I slowed the airplane down, hit the tree. There was about an 8-inch diameter treetop on an oak that the right wing hit. By the way, it did not break the wing. It just put an indentation in the leading edge. Immediately, the airplane wanted to, I've done quite a few spins, it acted like it wanted to spin off to the right. Just like you'd enter a spin, it wanted to roll inverted and spin right. And I just instinctively pushed the left rudder to the stop, brought the nose back around, and at that point we were basically nosediving to the ground at a high rate of speed. And I said, okay, we're not going to make it if that happens. Oh, so I just pulled and I held. And the airplane, if I had to guess, I'd say at 50 to 65 miles an hour, essentially just belly flopped into a field that's as wide as from here to that Cessna 150 prop. So yes, you can stop the Viking shorter than 800 feet. It was by far, the thing about it was though, folks, is that at that moment of impact on the first tree, I've never had this feeling before, but I did that evening. And that was that we're probably not going to make it. But I'm going to do everything I can to see that we do. The airplane impacted. It was the most violent thing that I really can't think of describing it other than putting yourself in a grand piano and sliding it off the top of the Crystal Building downtown and what that would feel like when you hit the pavement at the bottom. It hurt like hell. But thankfully, God is good. He gave us adrenaline and endorphins and epinephrine, norepinephrine. She was injured. She was really complaining about her back right after the impact. By the way, there was no fire. I was very thankful for that. She looked back. My dog Buddy was there. Brian was missing. She crawled in the back because she was in so much pain and laid there with Buddy. And I had to kick the door open, which is why it's a good idea to try to have wherewithal to crack a door open before you impact off airport. But I walked out and called for Brian. He came hobbling over with one leg dangling up and literally just fell at my feet and just said, okay, dude, that was not cool. Not getting in an airplane with you again. But we all lived. Tammy went out on an ambulance. I thought I was going to be Mr. Macho and just visit her there. Then I got in the family vehicle and realized I don't feel so good. Taking her to the ER with her. Turns out she had 4 ribs. She has 4 cracked ribs and a and I ended up with a cracked sternum. Thank you. I wanted to say the other S word that's anatomy, and that wouldn't have been it. Then I also cracked 3 ribs that joined that, and my left, I want to say 13, splintered a piece of bone into my left lung, and it was pulling up some blood. Cracked my L1, my L2, my tailbone, and bruised heart pretty bad. Anytime I'd roll over in the bed for about a week, I could feel those broken ribs move and crack and pop. But anyways, at this moment in time, if I hadn't told you the story you knew about it, you probably wouldn't even know I've been through all that 2 weeks ago. So again, God is good, and we're here, and that's my story.
What happened to the engine?
We don't know yet. What we do know, based on a very preliminary finding from the FAA, is that 2 of the connecting rods were broken, or sheared. And I will tell you, I have spent the last couple of years apprenticing as an A&P. And the things that I have discovered that have been signed off on, the wrong size bolts, improper torque values, improper safety wiring. There are so many little thousands of things that can literally lead to disaster that we have to somehow balance with the joy of flying and the prudence of doing our homework and pre-flight planning. But I don't know. I'm not really going to speculate, but connecting rods are a common failure point. Could have been an improper torque value that allowed those bearings to shift in the saddle and hindered that oil flow, and it progressively got worse, and then one failed and caused it. I don't know, but that's what we know.
So, who did you report that you weren't going to make the airport tour? How long did it take that?
I reported it to Atlanta Center. And the impact was so violent, I think it just killed the electrical system, because I don't remember turning the master off. Do you remember me turning the master off?
we want to go down the ground.
Yeah.
I don't think we even thought about it. Your thought was to get out of the plane.
Yeah.
And, I jumped in the back seat. I don't know how my, mother in a car accident, her phone was crushed or how it ended up there, but I had my phone in my hand.
She called 911.
I just called 911 and they asked where we were and I had my mind.
I used my flashlight.
I just speakerphone and went to my Google Maps on my phone and put the location.
Yeah.
And I would tell them where we're at. And that way they also see that in my phone too. So if you're, somebody you know, or make a phone call, sync to my phone, and,
That's a good point. Sync to my phone. Yeah.
yeah.
Snap vector to the nearest area. I didn't. That's a cool phraseology.
Yeah, they were to us within probably 15 minutes. Since we happened to be right on the road in the field that had an opening in the trees and the ambulance.
The only open spot.
Yeah. It was, he takes a pinpoint from the work. It's kind of one of those things you look at it, we're really on so. But,
On that particular airplane, I had not. And that's another learning lesson. On the 150, I have, since day one. But yes, get an oil analysis and send that off every oil change because there are some metals in there that can potentially reveal a developing problem. Any other questions?
if I can see
Yeah, you mind coming up and talking a little louder?
yeah.
I know everybody's ready to go, but definitely want the lady to talk. She stayed.
Just from a passenger standpoint and, ways that you can have your passengers prepared and safety. I know I've been, the first time I went up flying with Jason, he mentioned where the fire extinguisher was and, it wasn't too much more than just, here it is. But when everything started going bad, that was my first, there was an expletive at first, oh my gosh, but instantly, as a passenger, there's nothing I can do except try to be prepared as much as I can to assist and grab the fire extinguisher and just watching that firewall and hoping that nothing's going to pop through, but trusting that he had it. And, in my mind, I knew Jason would fly the plane, and I just prayed that God would protect us, and he did, and Jason flew the plane until it was absolutely stopped, and that was the most important thing. And just give passengers, let them know things. It's kind of scary to say, you're taking someone up to the plane the first time, you don't want to think, well, hey, something might happen, but everyone needs to know where the fire extinguisher is. Everyone needs to know to remain calm, that screaming and freaking out is not going to help. So, let your passenger, regardless of how frightened they may be, know that there might be something and you need to know where that fire extinguisher is because your pilot's flying the plane and they're not going to be able to put the fire out except for, in this exception, he did do that. So, I'm thankful that we're all here and our dogs are all okay. Again, like you said, no one would ever know walking around that we would have been in a plane crash 2 weeks ago. So.
Yes, sir. Glad you brought that up. What's your name? Tony? Tony?
Yeah.
Tony, I'll tell you what, I will not own another aircraft without, if it doesn't have shoulder harnesses and you can't get an STC, well, it rules that one out. It did not have shoulder harnesses. And I will tell you, peeing is one of my favorite free gifts, free pleasures God gave us. And it hurt to pee for a while because of all that energy that little lap belt had to absorb, keeping my fat 189 butt from flying through the windscreen that was no longer there. So, I'm a big believer in those now. 1970.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
A couple things I just want to caveat on that he spoke about. Fly the airplane all the way to ground impact. You know, you got to keep flying the airplane. You want to, if you're going to do an off-field landing, you obviously want to hit the ground at minimum practical airspeed. Anybody again talk about physics, about mass times velocity squared in potential energy. So anytime you square the airspeed, if you're 5 knots fast, that's 5 times 5 now is 25 times the mass of that airplane. And that's what that airplane has to absorb, and that's what your body has to absorb, obviously, in a crash site. The other thing is flying at night. I told Jason yesterday when we were speaking on the phone, I flew airplanes, general aviation airplanes at night all the time when I was young. I don't fly single engine airplanes at night anymore. Now, I do the 3 hours that are required for a private pilot because I have to. But for me, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever for me to fly a single engine airplane at night. I have no fear whatsoever of an engine failure in a single engine airplane during the day. I think my experience, my knowledge, even the newest private pilot that we got here, has been trained well enough that daytime single engine failure or an engine failure during the day is not a big deal. I don't care where I put the airplane, whether it be in the trees, whether it be in between 2 buildings, a little tiny field, in the water. I'm not an advocate of putting a fixed gear high wing airplane in the water. I will not put a fixed gear high wing airplane in the water. I'll land in the trees before I put it in the water. And the reason for that is the potential of it flipping over. And I'd just be really pissed if I ended up knocking myself out and drowning because I ended up putting it in the water. So I won't put it in the water. Now I'll put that Bonanza or that Arrow in the water any day for an option. So low wing retract, not a big deal. But anyway, so I won't fly single engine airplanes at night. There's no, the survivability, and they're here talking today by the grace of God and his skill, obviously, but it was nighttime. And his options were very minimal. And he obviously chose the right one and was able to get the airplane down safely, and they're both here standing on this fine earth with us for a little while longer. So, but, that's just my personal preference. Jason, go ahead.
I forgot to mention it, but I purposely left the gear up.
Yeah.
Because I knew I was going into the trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
My thought process was that it won't snag and flipping the airplane forward.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just me, and it's a personal preference. Now, Bill, my business partner, actually has more flight time than I do, but he'll still fly the Bonanza at night, but I won't. It's an exponential curve in the wrong direction, and there's no place that I have to be ever that justifies me having to fly a single engine airplane at night. Just a personal opinion or a personal preference, but anyway. Okay, I know it's 11 o'clock. Enrique, this cylinder here is from a story that he has. Part of this was going to open up for lessons learned. I'll tell you that one of the things in closing, things that are going to change or that I want to do here is Bill and I have been talking about it for a long time, and we haven't done it, is try and have quarterly safety meetings. So because I think it's a great forum. Like I mentioned when I opened this morning and talking about it. So if everybody's okay with it, if you don't mind letting Enrique tell his story about that cylinder and the airplane that it came off of. Again, I think he's got a little bit of lesson learned to talk about what